The Group Practice Boss Conference tickets are on sale now. We expect them to sell out in just a couple days. There are only 120 of these available. Head on over to practiceofthepractice.com/conference to read more and grab your ticket. This is the Practice of the Practice podcast with Joe Sanok, session number 1120. Welcome to the Practice of Practice podcast. I'm Joe Sanok, your host, and I am so excited that you are hanging out with me today. Today, we are giving you behind the scenes in regards to our membership communities. And so a lot of our consultants are doing teachings every single week. Every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, we have live teachings going on in our membership. So we wanted to give you a little behind the scenes. So we're going to be hearing from Nicole Ball, talking about what to do when referrals are slow, HR basics with Andrew, client retention with Ashley, scaling with Nicole Ball, choosing the right project management systems, and all sorts of other things over the coming weeks. I can't wait to dig into this with you. If you want help from one of our consultants, please head on over to practiceofthepractice.com/apply. I'll chat with you for 30 minutes to determine if one of our membership communities or consulting might be right for you. Now let's get started with this episode.
So this is our last kind of HR focused thing in terms of this series. And I think listed on the thing today was talking about just kind of different rules of engagement when you kind of shift over to like being W-2 versus 1099, because it's a little different. There's some additional things you can kind of do as a manager if you so choose, also depending on the kind of contract and stuff like that you have, or employment agreement, I should say, or the nature of the employment's going to kind of change how much you really need to kind of go back and invest in getting people to kind of fall in line with a particular modality or other things like that. So anyone have particular areas they want to make sure get covered or start off with questions? Looks like we're a little smaller group today. We'll see who else kind of pops in. So everybody got the flat, like, rainy day vibes, it seems like. So no specific questions. Interesting. So I guess couple, I'm trying to remember it. Like, let me drop something in here and see if other people can access it, or if it's only something that I can access because I'm a HR professional, member and stuff. I have all this blog access, and I don't know how much is public and how much is paywall. Anybody able to click through it?
So I can read through it, but it's kind of hazy. So I can't read all of it. It looks like I can get most of it though.
Got it. Okay. So half of what I have pulled up is stuff that's more related to like if you have to let an employee go, like kind of what the rules around that are, because that could be where, depending on what state and what declaration of arrangement you have, kind of gets in trouble. So contract wise, like if you have any familiarity with contract, and this would apply to like insurance contracts and stuff like that too, there's cause and then there's without cause. And so basically like anything that's without cause basically just says, hey, this isn't a good fit. What's our like offboarding, like, down ramp, exit ramp kind of like protocol? So Sabrina's working in my practice, like, she decides, hey, I don't really want to be here anymore. I want to go over to like Corey's practice and do something over there. It seems like a better fit. What are the stipulations around how that should go in terms of exiting and things like that? And so if it's just as simple as that example there, that would be a without cause kind of termination of contract. With cause would be something like, hey, Sabrina like punched a client in the face, and clearly that's not an okay thing to do, so I need to let her go, so you're terminated immediately and off you go. So I don't think that Sabrina would actually do that, but just like, in terms of differentiating between like what a normal kind of exit strategy would be. I know a lot of states and a lot of employers kind of really ask people to do 2 weeks. It's interesting, like, I think philosophically kind of thinking about that, being in an at-will state. So I'm in an at-will state with North Carolina. I'm an at-will employer. So that really means that I can just let people go at will if I just decide for whatever reason I don't like it. And the 2-week thing is really interesting because it's for the benefit of the employer. It never seems to really benefit the employee, because if you've ever given 2 weeks notice at a job or any kind of notice, like my experience has been you're pretty much closed out from that notice point. Like, I've never had a job that was actually like, here, let's make sure you kind of wrap things up and get things settled over. It's kind of just like, well, there's the cutoff, and you just kind of get alienated and sit there while the rest of everything kind of offboards and things like that. So depending on the nature of your job offer letter and things like that is going to kind of dictate the structure of that employment. I think at will gives you the most flexibility. In terms of, let's see, I'm trying to just pull up because there's a whole ton of blog stuff that kind of bookmarked and things like that. Yes.
Can I just ask, so if I'm at an at-will state and we don't have a contract, can I put something together that says that I would like a month's notice and this will be our process for ending?
You can. It just doesn't mean it's enforceable.
Gotcha.
That's really, I guess, the biggest thing with the at-will side of stuff is contract wise, like it's a little more enforceable because you have that kind of stipulated in there about it's going to be, here's what our offboarding really looks like. In terms of the at-will, just kind of general employment thing, if it's at-will, either party can terminate without notice at any time for any reason.
Thanks.
Yeah. There are, and I'm kind of pointing, what I'm doing is I'm kind of printing some of these things out. There are some conditions, and most of it's going to be more state dependent than it is necessarily like at a federal level, about terminating somebody and some protections in there. And these are things I'm going to drop into, I guess, the chat and stuff like that. I still haven't figured out in Circle how to make a little area that's just like a file repository thing. I made a little section to just try to kind of try things out, and it looks like I can do individual Circle posts in there. I can't necessarily just be like, here's a bank of documents and stuff like that. I'd really like to figure out how to do that. But like the rest of us, it's kind of quick. You all do systems, you all run like 15 different things. You know how long it takes to like kind of learn this other little detail over here kind of stuff. So it's kind of in that camp. But pretty much without exception, or very little exception, there's kind of no real reason to worry too much about that. I would still absolutely advise you to talk to an employment lawyer or have one you can call if a situation does arise. I know has anyone had to let anybody go yet? I have. Am I the only one?
Just interns, so it was planned.
And I've had contractors leave, Andrew, and I've had to let employees go when I worked for other organizations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and my person I was under a contract situation. Really, really, really not enjoyable. So if you can do the whole hire really slow thing as best you can. And this is also why I like that human relationship between all your employees really does matter, because it can kind of gives you a sense of like where people are at. If people are considering leaving for whatever reason, hopefully you can start that dialogue and come up with a really easy, like amicable breakup, because it's going to happen. Like it's going to happen. So just have some strategies and plans in place. And then when stuff does go off the rails, if you can, make sure you're not letting the person go on their birthday. I didn't realize that was a thing until after it was already going. So that made my one time firing somebody like even worse. So, even on that note, I don't know that, at least in the paperwork that's required by law, I don't know that there's a way you can automatically know what somebody's birthday is. I don't know if that shows up in the payroll system, but you can't really ask, there's more rules on hiring in terms of questions you can and can't ask. Like you can't ask if somebody's pregnant, demographic background, a lot of that kind of stuff you just can't ask. So,
but Andrew, that would be when you're completing your proof of
that's right,
eligibility to work. You would get their driver's license and another. So I mean, you would learn it. Yeah.
No, I forgot about that.
Yeah, I think even on the W-4, that's a requirement to fill in birth date. Maybe, I don't know, but.
All I know is under like a W-9 contractor thing, there was nothing that I would have known about this was so-and-so's birthday, and then to have that really awkward conversation already, and then 20 minutes in after you broke the news, like, it's my birthday, like, it was so bad. So yeah, as much as that, you can kind of know ahead of time, and also just kind of have a strategy and a game plan. If you haven't already come up, like, as you're doing your onboarding, you should make a mirrored opposite version as an offboarding checklist. So things you're going to want to make sure of if you issue any like company property. Like I give people iPads if they want it. It's a really affordable way to kind of give them something that's a way to basically prevent any kind of work data stuff ending up on a personal computer system of some kind. And iPads, you can do the whole thing with Apple Care and the little keypad and everything else for about $600. The other nice thing I like about iPads from like a tech standpoint is if you need to like nuke it and erase everything on it, you can have those enrolled in the family plan. And trust me, it's exceptionally hard to like undo the like existing passcode. It took me 2 hours to undo the one that I set up 2 years ago for the one I just reissued, and Apple makes it really difficult. So if it ever goes missing, you can basically wipe it clean from remote and don't have to worry about it. So that's another reason to consider like Apple kind of stuff. But there should be like an offboarding checklist to say, all right, this is the order of operations about this person's effectively terminated as of this moment, and I need to get them out of the like EHR system and emails and whatever else you're providing and those kind of things. So as you're making your onboarding checklist, do a mirror version of did I undo this as this person left, kind of thing. So let's see. Termination wise, like does anybody have any questions about termination? Other than it definitely would be advised in all cases to have some kind of employment lawyer to consult with about saying, hey, I need to let this person go. Is this an okay way to do it? That'll be worth your phone call, because if there was some kind of response to that termination kind of thing happening, then you at least you've been advised on how to go about it in a way that you're as protected as possible. So in between hiring and termination, has anybody had to do like performance reviews and other things like that? I think if I recall, let me see if I've got this group down. Heidi, you're the only one that's really had like a big group, and everybody else is kind of just getting started. So most people have probably not done a whole lot of performance improvement plans. I see Kimberly shaking her head.
Hi.
I've done that for not private practice stuff.
I'm so sorry for being late. I have a little chaos here at home right now. I don't know if it's a medium-sized group, about 13 employees.
Okay.
Maybe half are full-time, and we have unfortunately had to do, I think, 2 performance improvement plans, which actually were quite successful. So I'm glad that we did them. I honestly don't know if we're doing them correctly, so I'd love to hear a little feedback on that, but we did have to implement that.
Can you talk a little bit about what the performance issues were around? I mean, in terms of group practice owners I know around here, the majority of it tends to be, it always comes back to documentation and getting notes done on time. That seems to be the number one reason people are like having to get revisited about following through and doing notes. And deciding, I guess, how you're going to kind of, 1, keep track of that, and 2, just kind of have conversations about things. I really loved the contractor thing, because it would be the occasional like, hey, Justina, how you doing on notes? And she'd be like, well, and I was like, well, do you have a plan? She's like, yeah, I'll get them done in the next week. I was like, all right, cool. I was like, just a reminder, it didn't happen if it's not documented, if something goes wrong with a client, and if the insurance decides they were done too late, then that's going to kind of be on you, because that was the agreement for the contractor split. So generally run documentation. Has anybody else had to do anything outside of documentation?
Well, I had one a couple of weeks ago about a violation on non-solicitation, but that was on the 1099 side, Andrew. So I just wrote the person up and had sign off, me and them. Not fun.
No, none of this is ever fun. And I'm very clear with people, like, please don't make me put that kind of boss hat on. Like, it's absolutely not what I want to do either. So any way we can stave that off and not have to get there would be best.
We had an interesting situation where we were doing a lot of team meetings and case conferencing and some supervision, obviously virtual. We're mostly in person, but we also do a lot of virtual work. And we had a clinician who was starting to, it just appeared like maybe she wasn't alone in the room during the meetings, kind of like looking off to the side, like maybe we'd see a shadow. And we kind of just casually said, look, I know this isn't like a session. And obviously we've reiterated 8 million ways so all our clinicians know that when they're doing a session, they obviously have to be in a private room. And I had no reason to suspect that she wouldn't have done that. I think clients would have mentioned it if she hadn't. But I think because she thought they were staff meetings, that it was okay to have, like, so what if like somebody was walking around, a family member? And we really tried to explain that although we're not using client names, if we're discussing something, we're still talking about details. And also our clinicians want to feel safe having open conversations about issues without somebody's family member or significant other walking around, even in the background. So we just had a conversation. She verbalized an understanding, and then it happened like 2 or 3 other times. So we had to go forward with a performance improvement plan saying you're not allowed to attend meetings virtually from your home. You have to go to the office. Mm-hmm. She has her own office. It's hers to use 24/7. And so that was how that was. So even those late meetings from 8 to 9:30, she would have to stay in the office to have that. And she understood and complied. So we let it go for like 3 to 6 months. And then we started to let her know she could obviously start to work from home as she saw, which she actually said, I feel like I'm better focused at the office. Mm-hmm. So she kind of continued anyway. But I have to say, I've been doing this for the group thing for like 6 years and solo for way longer than that. And I didn't even imagine that would be a thing that we'd have to address.
I'm curious with that because you'll may notice like there's some generational differences about like boundaries and communication and expectations and stuff like that. So it just seems like, especially in and around technology use and what's like appropriate, like the younger people get, the more just interconnected and unable to like separate out things and just also not paying as much mind about who else may be perceiving things. I even run into this with like some clinical clients where like, are you by yourself? Like, are you in a, we should probably reschedule because it doesn't look like you're, able to do that. And it's consistently with younger people, it seems like too, not to like be ageist or anything, but it does seem like just how people engage with technology is very different. From the looks of things in here, it seems like everybody kind of grew up in like as 80s kids and then graduated college with the internet and cell phone. So that idea of my technology goes over here and I'm going to be focused on this interaction here is much more kind of what we grew up with. And kids these days, they're born with a tablet and a phone, right? Like everyone comes with one, right? That's how it works. So, I do have a couple of performance improvement plan kind of things. I think one other thing, I guess, to think about in terms of performance improvement plan and termination and considering those things, asking, is this a teachable thing or is this something that's more of a temperament thing? Because performance plans are going to be most effective if it's a teachable thing, like a skill, like, hey, like documentation should be in within a certain time frame. Is it the notes? Is it not setting time aside? Is it some other thing like that? Boundaries around, office space and things like that. Like, do you have stuff in the background that's distracting and too visible? And I literally on 5 different platforms on a day like today, which makes me crazy because it's different camera things every single time. So like this is a wider view. Sometimes it's more narrow. It's funny when I sign in, like it was actually like a lot more cropped up here than it is now. And I do laugh because half the time, like it looks like I've got pictures coming out of the top of my head and stuff like that too. But just thinking about background and those kind of things, those are all very like easily addressable things because they're behavioral, right? They're not maybe like the values that go into that behavior in the first place. And those are going to be harder conversations. This is like me as an ACT therapist really coming into play about, breaking things out more than just in a CBT kind of mode. So temperament wise, like, I guess another thing to maybe like think about too. So schedule management and time management thing is a big deal in our field because it's appointment based. So, if you're like me, I've got appointments over here with Pop. I've got these types of meetings which are easy and consistent. So it's always Tuesdays. It's always group practice boss. It's always 1:00. I know what that is if it's on my schedule. Group practice launch, those other kind of things, easy to plug in. Individual stuff gets a little more complicated. So even though I might have like fixed spots, I'm like, I still have to look and see who's actually in that spot for today, right? And is it free? So between consulting clients and then clinical clients, I'm managing probably 35, 40 different people for individual appointments scattered throughout a month. It's nuts. If my EHR calendar ever goes down, I'm so screwed. It's terrifying, right? Like, because it's either that or like you're replicating into multiple places. And I even do that too because I've had some calendar sync issues. So anything that's on my pop calendar gets automatically copied to my like business calendar, which then eventually it shows up on my EHR. And there's ways to do that to where none of the names kind of get translated, but it's blocked out on my schedule so I know I'm busy. But those types of things in particular, especially for newer clinicians or people that like have certain neurodivergent type tendencies, like it's going to be much harder to organize those kind of things, and trying to think about what can I do to kind of make sure that this is a scheduling, simple, easy way for them to track things. This was kind of where like the break among things that kind of broke down about why I had to let somebody go. It was like, how are you keeping track of your time? Because I'm kind of giving you a list of things that need done, and it seems like about 3 of the 5 things get acknowledged, and maybe 1 or 2 of them get done, and I don't really know how to like help you support this. And even in trying to ask like, hey, here's kind of the expectations and setting those things, it just wasn't somebody that could really kind of meet those. And then we parted ways. So it kind of started with a behavior, but then it kind of came down to other factors that weren't necessarily like a teachable kind of thing, or at least not being received that way. And so it didn't really work out. So anybody else kind of think of some ideas or things around that might be complicated about, or, hey, punctuality. So if you're somebody that's like, hey, I'm a 5 minutes late kind of thing, not all clients are like that. I tell my clients, I'm like, especially if I'm working from home, I'm probably going to be about 3 minutes late. And that just seems to be where I run. It's nothing personal. If you haven't seen me by 5 after, then wonder what's going on. But I just tend to run about 3 minutes late. And that's kind of what I noticed. And I'm very clear with people about that. I do manage to make it here pretty much on time. So good on me for that. But outside of here, I'm not the best. If you had a clinician that's say chronically late, like how do you address that? Like, is it health issue related things? How do you start navigating like, hey, I realize that you have some health issue related things that sometimes disrupt your ability to show up. How can we kind of come up with a plan that works for the business, works for you, works for your client, so that we can kind of have a plan in place to kind of have a more complicated, nuanced kind of thing worked out? So these are all things that kind of factor into that performance related thing that are not just strictly your KPIs.
Andrew, this is definitely like personality wise, but I have a clinician who is very passive, and I'm getting feedback from, especially from a group that she's doing, that she's not interjecting and she's letting some people like run most of the group time. And some feedback from clients is that she's not direct, and she just like she's a very lovely, but she's a big people pleaser, and it shows up because she's not challenging some of those behaviors that we want to be challenging in sessions.
So to me, like, and I'm just thinking of why clinical supervision, especially in grad school level, was really helpful. Because at least the clinical supervision I got then and even afterwards, but mainly in grad school, a lot of discussion around how to develop your assertive communication skills as a clinician, because they're necessary. They're necessary one-on-one. They're necessary, especially in groups, because you have to sometimes shut people down in groups. And so even though it is a temperament thing, it is still a skill, and it's really a clinical skill. So this would be something I would kind of look at having this person work with in a clinical supervision setting, or having somebody kind of mentor them about group dynamics and things like that. Even though there was one person I can think of in a group that, this was when I was doing DWI groups. I literally just gave up trying to shut her down, like, because it was impossible. Like she would see you start to breathe in and would talk faster and louder. And it was just, I just finally quit. It's the one person I just finally quit with that. But learning how to have the confidence to just kind of like interject in a group and just say, hey, like, there's so many soft ways to do that are like indirect, I guess is it. But this to me is like, it is a temperament thing and it's a skill set thing too. And it is a clinical skill that's going to be necessary in group settings and otherwise. And so that's how I would kind of look at things. I don't know if it's necessarily a like, performance improvement plan kind of thing about if you aren't able to do this level of assertive communication by such and such date that it's a problem, but it is kind of in between. Elizabeth, you popped your camera on. Do you have something to say?
I have a question for everyone.
Sure.
I think the time management issue, I was thinking about that while you were talking, that because our structure is, they are employees, but they do get paid per session. So per completed session, plus note time. So it's an hour of pay, which is a 45-minute session plus the notes. Time management is really, we try to teach them as much documentation training and efficiency as possible, because the quicker they can do everything, the more money they make, essentially, right? If it takes you really a long time to do your notes, or if you let a client go long, you're getting paid for one session because you completed one session. So the more efficient you are, the more money you make, right? And the happier you are, and the more boundaries and clinical outcomes, whatever. But in thinking of going down the road to salary, this is honestly one of my reluctancies, I guess, around salary. And full confession, I am an employee of a school district. I'm a full-time school social worker on top of running a practice. And I'm fully aware of how much time I can waste in a school day. And I think that's one of the reasons I've really never wanted to have to manage salaried employees, because how do you get people out there? So how do people do that? How are they structured if they're paying a salary and people are coming in late, or letting sessions go over, or how do you manage all that?
If it was me looking at this, I would be looking at sessions running long. That's on the clinician. So they're working more within that window, right? It's different if they're coming in late, because that's impacting the client care, and it's not really reflective of professionalism and timeliness and appointment-based kind of stuff. So to me, they're a little different. If somebody's struggling with the amount of time it takes them to do notes, that's a trainable thing. Or maybe it's looking at your entire note template to see if it needs to be reevaluated and more efficient. I have at least one neurodivergent person on my staff, probably more than I'm aware of, but the one that I am aware of, we're friends, so it's been very openly shared. And in terms of efficiencies, if it passes that person's test, then it generally passes normies, or however you want to refer to the non-neurodivergent crowd. One of my neurodivergent friends, he's I like that. So anyway, as a non-neurodivergent person, having a note template that works for me and also works for somebody that's in the ADHD world's helpful, because then different kind of things. So salary wise, this is where having an employment attorney is going to be really helpful, in terms of knowing in your state, does the status of being an exempt employee really count too? Because in general, medical professionals were classified as exempt because of the kind of nature of the work we do. I don't know that I don't necessarily agree with that, but it is one of those kind of things that is particular to our kind of field, and often for teaching and education too, where it's just your salary, that's it. If you work 60 hours a week grading, that's your problem, not what we assign you from a workload standpoint. Think the bigger concern I would have, thinking from a salary standpoint, is, are they doing enough billable hours to cover the full-time equivalent pay? Not so much about, are they efficient within that 40-hour work week? I know of at least one large, well-established group practice that their model is salary-based. I think they're looking at kind of having around 25 kept appointments a week for an average. And outside of that, it's completely up to the clinician to kind of schedule where the hours they work are. And there's also, this one has an unlimited pay time off thing, because it's part of the salary kind of thing. So long as you're meeting your 25 a week average for billable hours, which is what the salary is drawn from, everything else is covered. So if the person takes 5 hours doing notes and that's all they have, and there's no staff meetings and other things like that, well, they work a 30-hour week and get a salary for a full-time equivalent. If they're less efficient with notes, or maybe they have one of those weeks where there's a lot of client follow-up, they have a client in crisis, and they're kind of having to do management in between things, then they work more toward that 40 hours, but they're still kind of under that whole range of things, right? So is the concern the administrative time being out of bounds, or is the concern about not having enough billable hours for the salary?
I think they're proven to have billable hours that work. I mean, right now we offer benefits. So if they have 30 spots available on their calendar and they're consistently seeing 25, I mean, even when it drops to 21, we don't do anything about it. They're able to access health benefits, vision, dental. So it's essentially like that. But I think it still feels beneficial to both sides. So they're still only getting paid for those completed sessions, and some admin time. We factor in like 4 hours a week of just other stuff. So they get like 4 or 5 hours of kind of float work. But for them too, they have that unlimited freedom in scheduling. They're not like sitting in whereas where I'm in New York. So in agencies, they work 40 hours a week, they get a salary, they feel the sense of security, but they're just given like tons of ridiculous busy work. If they only have 20 or 30 clients a week, they could actually give them 40, or more likely they're just giving them sort of assignments. And then what happens when they're calling in, or they're canceling their clients, or they're still getting that salary, where I think our structure, they would not be inclined to just cancel tons of clients, and then if they did, they have to use their sick time to kind of manage that. So I don't know. I think we're probably like, it's not that big of a deal, and I have an amazing team that we trust immensely, but I'm more thinking down the road, as you grow, you kind of lose a little bit of that connection and maybe don't know all your employees as well as you would like to. And the salary thing, I think, is just scary. Especially we went through this year. I don't know how many other, I'm sure everybody was affected by the whole Change Healthcare. No money was coming in for a couple of months, which was really the first time they were working and no income was coming in, because like when we went through the pandemic, nobody was working. So they weren't working. They weren't getting paid. It wasn't as much of a financial stressor, but I kind of think of things like that, like whoever saw that coming. And what if they start canceling people casually, or their numbers drop? Yeah, then you put in a performance plan for bringing their numbers back, but that could be a slow process. So I guess my real question is like, how risky is the salary thing, or do you just see it working well in most cases?
I think it really depends. I think some of it depends on your comfort level as a business owner. So regarding the Change Health thing, things I noticed last week, and I need to email my biller and just say, hey, so money's been coming back in, but I don't know what it's for 3 different insurance companies. So that's the where my stress is. I'm like, I don't know who needs to get X amount of dollars because the EOBs haven't hit the system yet. And I only have one company I could actually go through and kind of cross-reference. I know one of my friends who's in a smaller group did salary as an experiment last year, and kind of what she found was mathematically where she needed people to be was maintaining at least 22, and she was running into people that didn't really want to see that. They only wanted to do 16. She's like, well, I'm taking y'all off a salary because here's where the math works, and I just can't have you working 3 days a week. That's not what salary is. Like, I could part-time salary you, but I'm not going to full-time salary you, kind of thing. So again, I think some of it just comes down to who your team members are and their like willingness to participate and other things like that. And you're right. Like if insurance just decides to just stop paying because that's our lovely insurance system we have, not to say that that was the full reason why, but the Optum United, here's $10 for like $5,000 worth of revenue for a like little gracious loan kind of thing didn't really help anybody out either. Yeah, then you're in a much bigger risk for salary if you're having to cover $1,000 a week per person, right? Whether or not you're getting $1,000 reimbursement per person. So I think a lot of more of that comes down to what your risk tolerance is.
Something always comes up when you're running a private practice. Well, Gusto's payroll and HR services can make it a little easier. Gusto was designed for you, the small business owner. They take the pain out of running a business, automatically calculating paychecks, filing payroll taxes, setting up open enrollment. Gusto does it all. Want more? Time tracking, health insurance, 401k, onboarding, commuter benefits, offer letters, access to HR experts. You get the idea. With Gusto, you can focus on the joy of running your business. It's super easy to set up and get started. And if you're moving from another provider, Gusto can transfer all the data for you. It's no surprise 99% of businesses said the value they get for Gusto is worth the price. And here's the best part. Because you're a listener, you get 3 months totally free. All you have to do is go to gusto.com/Joe. Again, that's gusto.com/Joe. I'm telling you, you're going to love Gusto. Get started today.
So I'm curious because this is always a hot topic. Retention numbers. That's like probably the big one of the biggest things that it seems to come up about, so I have a clinician, seems like, after all of their clients are disappearing after 1, 2, 3, 5 sessions, like, where's your, like, what's considered a retained client? Obviously, it's going to vary a little bit depending on the types of clients you work with and the modalities you work with. So someone that's like a solution-focused clinician, 5 is going to be about all you're going to expect to see because that's the modality they're working in, or like accelerated, what is it? Was it ART, accelerated resolution therapies, the trauma quick fix thing? Um, I have friends that use that and really like it. So it's worth checking out if you're a trauma type practice to check that out. It seems like solution focused, but for trauma. And that's about as much as I know about it. But if you're more like an EMDR type person, like that's going to be probably 10 to 20, depending on where you're at, because you're going to need a couple of septic, I'm an EMDR practitioner that will make sure you are safe before we even get started with the EMDR because that's the right thing to do. I know there's some other people in my area that will just drop people right into like the EMDR protocol, and you're like, no, that just doesn't seem safe, right? Like for the client, but difference of how people practice and things. So are you setting expectations around typical treatment for outcomes, whether or not you're talking from a business standpoint or just from like an outcomes in general standpoint? A lot of the literature and studies seem to indicate like 8 to 12 sessions is about right for most people. So I come in, I'm stressed about XYZ. This is my identified goal. We work through that. 8 to 12 sessions is pretty typical for many things. If we're going to then get to why those are happening and why that's a problem and a more core level kind of thing, then we're going to continue on afterwards. But 8 to 12 sessions is going to be a kind of 2 to 3 month every week kind of meeting type thing. Other interesting data points, I haven't seen updated data and I'm still looking for it because I'm curious about this in my own practice, but apparently 35% of people show up for one session and that's it. And then 50%, yeah, this is like numbers from 2009. There's Whitney Owens has a thing in Circle talking about retention. If you can go find it, I think I want to say it's in Group Practice Launch. I could be wrong. But it's accessible to this community of people for sure, talking about these types of numbers. And then apparently 50% of people are gone after 3 sessions. Right. I can see a couple people like looking like question mark and those kind of things. Say 2. Sabrina, did you say 2?
Did you say 50% are gone after 2 sessions?
3.
3. Ooh, that's still bad.
Yeah. But again, like, so if you're thinking about things like retention and things like that, is it the clinician's ability to establish rapport with clients? Is it the client realizing the clinician they're paired with isn't really a good fit? Neither which is really the clinician's fault at all. Is it finances? I know for me that shows up a lot where people have changes in insurance or jobs. Asheville's a really high tourist based economy, so it's a lot of gig workers, restaurants, stuff like that. Job security around here is not particularly great, so finances is a real thing for people in and around my area, at least in terms of who ends up on my caseload. So are you in a position where you're tracking that and have those types of KPIs for your whole business so that as you're having conversations with clinicians about their caseload management, those kind of things, you can sort of differentiate between what's just real world stuff that has nothing to do with my clinician and then what maybe has to do with my clinician in terms of how they're interacting with people. And this is going to be one of those areas that's going to be very practice specific and really difficult to kind of suss out because you can't just sit on the wall, be in the same room as your clinicians are doing things for like 2 weeks to see really how they are with people. So thoughts around all of that, because it's complicated.
I mean, those numbers are astounding to me, what you're throwing out there, Andrew. Even in some of my clinicians that have really struggled, I would have never seen that kind of attrition. But the thing that I find that I hope other people have access to is my EHR system will give me those kind of numbers. And I used to be a research scientist, so I like to pull those numbers out. And even for clinicians that I had, over the 14 years of the practice, I'm able to kind of do some comparisons. And I did recently discontinue renewing the contract. I'm still converting into this W-2 thing. So one of my clinicians was up around maybe 15 to 20%, which was really high for us because our number tends to hover around like maybe between 6 and 8% attrition. But we worked with her, on the skill side, but there was also the trait personality piece. And so, yeah, those numbers are astounding to me. I feel like as a clinician, I'm trying to train my team on things like, don't just go to the first session, initial intake, and not end with doing some skill development and infusing hope. I don't take my car when my car's not working and have them just do an evaluation and tell me to bring it back the next time to get the work done. And so I work really hard with my team to say, like, hey, first session, yes, you have to get enough data to feel legally and ethically like you got your wits about you, and at the same time to kind of build that in. But those numbers are pretty appalling, Andrew.
Mm-hmm.
It makes me sad as a field.
Right? And again, some of this is just going to be, are you speaking to good fits for your practice? Because if it's not a good fit, everyone's going to pick up on that. And especially younger clinicians aren't going to realize like the amount of energy it takes to work with somebody that's not a good fit. And even now, like I'll occasionally get somebody on my caseload and we'll call a supervisor friend of mine. And even in the Supervision Institute last year, they were talking about, think about how much extra work you're going to be doing in between sessions to really support this client. Because if you're going to always be staffing it with somebody else every week, are you really the best fit as a clinician? It doesn't mean you're a bad clinician. It just, is that really worth it? And is this an area maybe you want to grow into, at which point, okay, working with that demographic makes sense because you're skill building into expanding who your niche is. But if it's not your niche and it's just somebody on your caseload that's not a good fit, that's a referral, because it's the most clinically sound thing to do. I'm trying to find my numbers thing because I was bookmarking this kind of stuff too, and we were kind of talking about this like staff wise. Other things too. How many of you all have male clinicians on your staff other than myself and Milo? Because obviously we're male and probably still see clients both. Are you all noticing there's a difference with male clinicians versus non-male clinicians in terms of just the number of people even willing to see a male therapist? And then people that are kind of like, actually, I last year probably had about 10 to 15% of people that left or actually after 3 sessions, I think I really want to see a female therapist, kind of like I thought at the start. And it's like, great, there's nothing I can do about it. You seem surprised to bring it up. This is a normal thing that happens a lot. And this comes up a lot with my consulting clients too about, hey, I don't know what to do here. I've got colleagues here too that are like, I have a male clinician on staff. How you doing? I'm like, I don't really know what to tell you because I'm having similar kind of issues and things like that too. It's a notable struggle. At least in Asheville, it's real interesting looking at the Facebook group because it'll be people that are really, 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 really specific about the demographic of the clinician they want to see, which in some cases makes sense, right? If you want to process what it's like to go through perimenopause, I'm not your person, right? Not from lived experience. I have lots of friends right now going through this, so I know vicariously, but it's not directly, I don't know, right? So if you want someone with that direct lived experience, I'm not that person. If you're just somebody that's dealing with general anxiety around work stress, anyone in this room, I'm sure, could deal with that relatively fine, independent of demographic, right? So sometimes it's just clinician or client preference. Other times it's interesting how in grad school, everyone's really happy to have male clinicians come into the field. And then as a male clinician, unless you have a really specific niche demographic, or you want to work with quote unquote men's issues, which I looked up, which is the same issues we all deal with, like anxiety, depression, all these other things. None of it was specifically male, except maybe the male experience of it, right? But there wasn't anything specifically male issue for mental health. It is really interesting, at least in our area, being in Asheville, where it's very identity oriented, at least locally, clinician demographics really make a huge difference in terms of ability to fill a caseload and things like that. So is that something other people have kind of noticed at all?
I haven't had the issue in terms of male female, but the age thing comes up a lot, which is really interesting because, obviously I'm not inclined to share the ages of the clinicians with potential clients. But they're also, like you said, if somebody's coming in for couples therapy and they've been married for 30 years, they are not likely going to stick around if the clinician is, 24. Mm-hmm. And they may have more Gottman training than anybody I've ever met and be phenomenal in terms of their skills and their compassion. But I get it. It's just, so sometimes they straight out ask. And it's just something that's kind of new, I guess. I've been in practice for 25 years. I don't really ever recall people requesting so frequently and so specifically that the clinician is, I remember people saying male, female, or somebody with experience, but it was never, somebody really like young or somebody much older. They have to be in their 50s, or somebody with kids or without kids or LGBT or what. And I'm like, wow, this is sort of a newer issue. Here I am thinking, like, I've been doing this for so long, and now there's this new issue that is a little dicey to handle, because there's a reality. If you just tell people it doesn't matter, sometimes it does matter. And you also won't have the retention. Retention has never been an issue, but I could see it would be if I discounted someone's sort of request, or at least in general. So I'm curious how people handle that too. Like if it's a male female request or just age, how do you respond to the client inquiry and say, well, like, I know my clinician's amazing, but she's like, no, she's not married. I know she doesn't have kids. And yeah, she's young. I mean, you want to tell me, what else can I say? I mean, sometimes I say, look, I'd bring my own kids there, which is the truth. I would never hire anybody I wouldn't bring my own teenagers to. So a lot of times we work with teenagers, and that helps. And it is the truth. But I understand people have requests. So how do people handle that?
I was going to say I had someone gave me an example of how they handled it because they were young. And this was years ago. And she said she told the client, I don't think you're really asking how old I am. I think you're asking how capable I am.
Yeah.
And that's all it took, right? And the person was like, yeah, actually I am. And then she was able to go into that. But that's how she spun it. And it worked for her. So.
Yeah, my clinicians can do that. And I remember being young and doing that, and having somebody say, like, how can you run a workshop on, teens when you have a 1-year-old? Well, I work 40 hours in a high school, and I've had a private practice for years, and I've worked with hundreds of teens and families. So it's not about lived experience. It's about my professional experience. And I think a lot of clinicians can answer that. But then how do you have an intake coordinator, like, intercept that, right? If the clinician's sort of not defending themselves and they're just saying, like, I don't, I want to come in for couples therapy, or I want to speak to somebody, but I don't want them to be some young, 24-year-olds. That kind of stumps my intake coordinator, and I don't blame her for feeling, like, well, then is 26 okay? Is 28 okay? Like, where do you go with all that?
Some other ways to kind of do that are just pointing out, for a little while, 2 of my people had waitlist status, and it was going to be 4 to 6 weeks before people were going to get seen. And then my newest hire didn't. And so that response back was just like, hey, how soon would you like to get seen? Because I have this great clinician here. Like, it's the I wouldn't hire anybody I wouldn't go see myself kind of pitch. You can kind of get them to say, this person has immediate openings. Like, so if you're looking to get seen in the next 1 to 2 weeks, I really recommend you at least, like, or what's it going to hurt if you meet with this clinician that has openings right now, just for a free consult? That's a free consult. You can check it out. You can talk about things. You can express your concerns about why they maybe weren't your first pick. And you can kind of, like, try other ways to kind of open things up with the client. The latest trend on the Facebook group around here that makes a lot of us nuts is, like, in search of seasoned therapists. Like, seasoned how? Like salt and pepper, like Indian food, like Asian. What kind of seasoning do you want the therapist to have, right? Just say, look, I want somebody that's experienced 20 years trauma. That's fine. That's different. That's more specific. That's more SMART goal. But the seasoned therapist of just, or just say fully licensed, right? Like, there's so many ways you could be more specific instead of just this vague, like, I don't want anybody that's new in the field. How else are people handling the kind of guiding potential clients toward people with openings?
I mean, I think we do a lot of what Elizabeth's saying. Like, we know what our niches are, and they're fairly specific. And so there are times if someone is really kind of rubbing up against that, where we will say that, there may be another practice in town that would be a better suit for you. Mm-hmm. But I think just, I don't remember what the stat is that I hear Joe trot out every now and then, like people with master's degree in a room. He says some number. Do you know what I'm referring to, Andrew?
I don't. What's the lead in, and maybe I can guess?
He says something like, when you graduate with your master's degree, you have way more experience and expertise than the remainder of people in the room, and it's something pretty, it's a pretty black and white stat. I just was listening to his podcast in the last week and heard it on one of the podcasts that he did maybe in March, but I think our goal is to really just trot out that, look, we are so grateful that you called us because you recognize that we do have an expertise. And so, a little bit of what you're also saying, Andrew, sometimes I have people that just aren't taking folks. And I fully respect that, you were eyeing up to see this person or this person. And given that they may be in waitlist status, we can offer you this alternative, or we can send you to another place that we have a partnership with around town. And there are people, because of our niche, that we say that we're trying not to suit every single need that calls us up, though we're always grateful that people trust enough to put the phone call into us. So I have a male on the team who also is known in Pennsylvania as a specialist in LGBTQ plus IA. He works really heavily with the transgender community. And so, that's really what we're trying to get him filled up on. Sometimes, he does have experience with other areas that, like, I'm a child specialist a lot of the week. And so, sometimes you have a 5-year-old girl and they're not used to having a male preschool teacher, or and so sometimes we'll just recognize that maybe this isn't the greatest fit. He had a little 9-year-old, she just started to menstruate, and he approached the parents and said, like you're saying about the perimenopause, maybe it would be good to talk with a female now who's had this experience, so we try to be flexible in that particular way too.
If you don't already have reciprocal relationships with other group practices in your area that you can refer and cross-refer to, I really recommend you do, because it's going to simplify your intake process a lot for when those people that show up and are not your specialty. So there's a local... And also, too, if you don't have a niche for your practice, it simplifies a lot of things, because it's easy to refer in-house, because, everybody's capable to kind of meet with whoever may come through the door. It also makes the marketing easier, because you're like, hey, we're into this particular demographic or this other demographic, or maybe these 2 or 3. And some of that's going to be just kind of the style as a practice that you are. Like, there's a franchise here called like the CBT Center of Asheville. They do more than CBT, but if people are specifically looking for CBT, they start there because marketing have been around a while. It's in their name about kind of, here's our identity from an approach. But just having that locally has really simplified the intake process too, because occasionally as people call and you're like, hey, actually, this person's practice or this other one, or even when you have people like a couple sessions in, are like, actually, I'm really looking for somebody who does XYZ. I can just give them referrals, and here's 3 group practices. I trust the owners to have good people on their staff, so I don't even have to think about it. And I know there's going to be openings, because I've yet to hear any of them say we don't have any openings at all. So it just simplifies. I don't have to go on and figure out who may have openings in my network unless it's really specialized. So we kind of got off the performance thing around how to train new clinicians about retention. I think was one of those things. And just because it is one of those more complicated things to figure out, like, do you actually have an established client, so retention's a thing, or do you have somebody that's kind of trying out therapy to see? The other thing too that's very different, kind of touching on like Kim or Kimberly and then Heidi, we didn't have BetterHelp to compete with 5 years ago. And all the BetterHelp ads are like, you can just ghost your therapist and pick a new one anytime you want. And I don't know if any of y'all have seen an uptick in that kind of thing. This year's I'm dumping my therapist and don't want to say it is, hey, something came up at work. Let's reschedule for next week. And then it's like, hey, when would you like to reschedule next week? And then I never hear from them again. And you're like, you could just say, look, use your words. I don't want to come anymore. It's that simple. Real easy. Then you don't get a follow-up email and then another one because I can't legally abandon you. Right? Like, it's just, the conversation ends when you want it to. If you just said, hey, I don't want to come anymore, that's fine. Right? So, but yeah, just having some ideas and thoughts about the typical length of time someone's going to be in your practice, how to have conversations with your clinicians about what that may look like, and not, it's trying to balance out business metrics that are very cut and dry because here's the numbers versus the human metrics of things that are all these wild cards we can't really control. And sometimes it's on the clinician and more of their thing for training, for performance and other things. And other times it's going to be just your current phase of clients that are coming through the door, which may be frustrating for not showing up or keeping committed times and other things like that. And if you work with like first responders or medical providers, you're going to have people that aren't able to commit to here's my fixed schedule every week and every, this fixed time kind of thing. So everyone's, I guess, got 2 o'clocks today because everyone bounced out early. Any other couple things from you all about this? I did drop a whole ton of links in the event thing to those articles. I was kind of printing those out in PDF form. So those are available for like how to do performance improvement plans. There's 2 different examples from the Society of HR Management up there, some things around bullying and some other things. Mainly like if you're used to contracting, you're kind of equal. If you're an employer, it's a little different and you kind of have to just respect the fact that you're an employer and should probably do some professional boundaries in and around that if you're not already doing so, to just be like, we're probably not going to go hang out at the bar like we used to if you're switching over kind of thing. Yeah.
Thank you this was really helpful. I have to apologize. I do work in a school. I had the day off today, so that's why I've been I've been camera off, hiding in the background, trying to capture whatever I could the last couple of Tuesdays, but it was only a couple of weeks left. So I appreciate your time and everybody's feedback. It's really great. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah, this was really helpful.
Yay, that's good, because I'm kind of new to specifically the HR topic, but last year, like, there was just, in asking like Joe and other people, I'm like, is there anything around leadership or like how to function this way? Because we get the soft skills, we don't get the organizational, like human relationship kind of structure of things. And so that was kind of a prompt to kind of go down the HR rabbit hole, which please don't. It's a whole, you have to set your soul aside and dissociate to like really function in the modern HR sense. But at least for these kind of things, it's useful for what we do, and having some structure and just some basic rules of like, here's the expectations and what we'd like from things is really important and helps everybody, including navigating what to do if something goes wrong.
Is that, do you foresee that being a thing in the future where there's like, there's like fractional CFOs? Is that's going to have to be a thing? I mean, group practices there was never this many, they were never this large, they're growing every day. Don't you think that's going to have to be like a thing, like a fractional HR company that like larger groups can hire? Or, I mean, I'm sure it exists already, but I don't know to what degree.
So my understanding of where things sit now is you do get HR consultants. I don't know of any that are specific to our field. The 1 or 2 that I'm aware of came from like large Fortune 500 corporate style stuff. And so so many things are different in that setting, right, than having 20 or less people.
Right.
Or even 10 or less people. Some of what you're talking about, HR related, mostly around payroll and benefits, a lot of that's built into like Gusto, ADP, QuickBooks, those kind of things. There's what's called a professional employment organization, or a PEO. So you basically kind of pull employees together. We talked about this last week. But basically you kind of lump a whole bunch of employees from different companies together, and all those companies are small, so that you get a larger, 500 to 1,000, let's say, group of people, and that makes the cost sharing of benefits easier because you have a larger number of people to pull from. So there's some HR involved in there, but a lot of, in terms of having a separate standalone like HR consultant that's going to like navigate kind of what we need, I hear they exist. I'm still trying to figure out where those might exist. There's also, I'll have to look it up. There's an organization specific to like human resources in the HR or HR medical field thing. And when I signed up for the SHRM thing last year, I also paid for that extra membership. It begins with an A. I'll have to look it up. But there is a company or organization around HR specific to medical stuff. But again, much of that's going to be for like working in a hospital system rather than this kind of level. So it's going to happen. It's not there yet. The other thing too, I think that's been a consistent question has been HR. And it's like, actually, you really want an employment attorney, you can have somebody kind of walk you through, here's the checklist, and that, I forgot about the employment verification thing where you get the driver's license. You don't get that on a contractor. So those types of checklist things really are the HR side of things, but how to be compliance, you're going to need an employment attorney regardless. So you might as well just know who that is to start with, and then you can kind of have HR questions around other things. But at the end of it, a good HR consultant is probably going to say you should talk to an attorney about legally what you can do in your state, because they're going to know the best. I think the exit line on the group practice podcast is, if you need a professional, find one. Yeah.
Great. Thanks so much. Enjoy your day, everyone.
All right. Take care.
Thanks, Andrew.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to the Practice of the Practice podcast today. These trainings are available in our membership communities. Now, we're going to be opening up our membership communities more than just when we're opening Level Up Week. So if there's one that you are interested in, I would love for you to head on over to practiceofthepractice.com/membership, where there's more details and you can get notifications when those open up. So if you are in solo practice, just getting going, if you are building and sustaining a sustainable solo practice, Next Level Practice is for you. If you are looking to launch a group practice launch is for you, and Group Practice Boss is for all those group practice bosses out there. If you're like me, I want to get things wrapped up and ready for next year so that we are starting the next year strong. If you need help with time tracking, health insurance, 401k benefits, payment, payroll, taxes, open enrollment, all those sorts of things, you've got to move over to Gusto. It's who we use here at Practice of the Practice. And because you're a listener, you get 3 months totally free. Head on over to gusto.com/Joe. Again, that's gusto.com/Joe. And I'm telling you, you're going to love it. Thank you for letting me into your ears and into your brain. Have a great day. I'll talk to you soon. Special thanks to the band Silence is Sexy for that intro music, and this podcast is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information in regard to the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, the producers, the publishers, or guests are rendering legal, accounting, clinical, or other professional information. If you want a professional, you should find one.